It was another rainy afternoon at the small college cafeteria, the kind of day that makes everyone just want to curl up with a cup of cheap instant coffee and disappear into their own world. But for Mira, there was no curling up, no hiding. She balanced her worn-out backpack on one shoulder and clutched a tiny paper bag with the only lunch she could afford that week, 2 slices of bread and some leftover curry she had packed the night before. Her stomach growled, but she didn't mind. Hunger had become part of her daily routine. As she scanned the crowded tables, her eyes landed on a boy sitting alone, hunched over his books. His lunch tray was full, untouched, but his expression was tired, almost hopeless. Most of the students passed by, busy with their friends, laughing about weekend plans, scrolling endlessly on their phones. But Mira, she couldn't ignore him. Without thinking too much, she walked over and offered half of her small lunch, the curry now slightly cold. "Here, you can have some," she said softly, expecting maybe a polite nod or a quiet thanks. But what she didn't expect was the surprise on his face, something like genuine disbelief, as if no one had ever offered him kindness before. He smiled, a small, awkward smile, and took the food. "Thanks. I don't have much today," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. That tiny interaction, simple as it was, planted a seed in Mira's heart, a warmth she hadn't realized she missed. It felt like for the first time in months, maybe years, someone had actually seen her. Not for her old shoes, not for her empty wallet, not for her quiet, invisible presence, but for her humanity. What Mira didn't know, as she returned to her corner table and nibbled on the rest of her bread, was that this small act of kindness would echo far beyond this cafeteria. It would reach places she could never have imagined, changing the course of her life in ways that seemed impossible. She went through her day as usual, attending lectures, scribbling notes with her cheap pen, pretending everything was normal. But there was a nagging feeling she couldn't shake, a strange flutter in her chest, a sense that the world was already beginning to notice her, quietly, almost invisibly. And then came the moment that would mark the beginning of everything. The moment that would make her wonder if life was sometimes stranger than dreams, if luck could really find someone who had almost nothing to offer. A moment that started with a simple car horn outside the college gates, a polished black vehicle that gleamed even under the dull, gray drizzle. Mira glanced up, wiping her hands on her worn jeans, and froze. A Rolls Royce, and someone was stepping out. Mira had always been careful. Careful with money, careful with words, careful with hope. Growing up in a small apartment with her mother and younger brother, she had learned early that life didn't hand out favors. Her mother worked double shifts as a cleaner, and her brother, just 10, had a way of laughing that could light up the darkest day, but sometimes it wasn't enough to keep the worries at bay. College had been a miracle in itself. A scholarship, a few tight connections, and a lot of determination had landed her here, among students who seemed to float through life on family wealth and endless opportunities. Mira often felt like an invisible shadow, sitting quietly in the back of classrooms, borrowing textbooks, and eating leftovers from the cafeteria when she could afford them. She didn't complain. She had learned to survive. But she also had a kind of stubborn pride. She believed that small gestures mattered, that even if the world was harsh, one act of kindness could ripple far beyond what you imagined. That's why she had shared her food with the boy that afternoon, even when her stomach protested. The boy, Arian, was from a different world entirely, or at least, it seemed that way to Mira. He was quiet, polite, and always buried in books or his laptop. No one really noticed him either, but unlike Mira, it wasn't because of lack or struggle. Arian came from a wealthy family that expected perfection, and every move he made was measured against impossible standards. To Mira, he seemed trapped in a golden cage, polite but lonely, like her in a different way. After that small exchange of food, they started noticing each other. Not in the loud, flashy way that college gossip thrives on, but in quiet moments, shared smiles in the library, brief conversations by the water cooler, small nods of encouragement when exams loomed. It wasn't friendship yet. It was something softer, slower, but it was enough to make Mira's days a little lighter. Still, life outside those little interactions didn't get easier. Mira's rent was overdue more often than she wanted to admit, and her mother's health had been fragile for months. Every coin she earned mattered, Every meal she could scrape together was a small victory. She had dreams, big ones, but dreams felt fragile when you lived hand to mouth. And then there was the Rolls-Royce. The car that had parked outside the college that afternoon wasn't just any car. It represented a world Mira barely dared to imagine, a world of wealth, power, and doors that opened almost magically, doors that her family could never dream of touching. She hadn't moved. She only watched, hidden behind a cluster of students. Someone stepped out, tall and poised, the kind of presence that made even the air around them feel heavier. And then, unexpectedly, the figure's gaze seemed to find her, lingering just a fraction too long, sending a shiver down her spine. It was impossible to know what was coming next. She had no idea that this brief moment, this seemingly ordinary afternoon, would set off a chain of events that would pull her from her quiet, careful life into a world she had only glimpsed from the edges. And as the figure moved closer, the rain glistening on the polished hood of the car, Mira felt her heart leap, not just with curiosity, but with a strange, nervous hope. Mira's heart raced as the figure approached, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but each drop felt like it was echoing the thundering in her chest. She had no idea who this person was, or why. Out of all the students milling around, they seemed to be looking right at her. "Excuse me." A voice called, clear and surprisingly gentle, breaking through the din of chatter and dripping water. Mira looked up, and there he was, Arian, standing beside the Rolls-Royce, a polite smile on his face, but with something in his eyes she couldn't quite place. Relief washed over her for a second, until she noticed the chauffeur waiting stiffly behind the wheel, the door already open, the engine purring quietly. I'm sorry," Mira stammered, taking a cautious step back. "I don't understand." Arian held up a hand. I want you to come with me." For a moment, her mind spun. Come with him? To where? Was this some kind of prank? A scholarship thing? Maybe he wanted to thank her for lunch? But why the Rolls-Royce? And the way he looked at her, it wasn't casual. It was intense, almost urgent. Mira hesitated. Her stomach churned with confusion and fear. She thought of her mother, her brother, the small apartment she called home, the careful budget she'd mapped out for the next month. None of that made sense with a sudden invitation to get into a luxury car with someone she barely knew. But there was something else too, an undeniable pull. A strange mix of curiosity, hope, and a need to know what could be waiting beyond this ordinary afternoon. She wanted to say no. She should say no. But her legs betrayed her, moving forward in tiny, hesitant steps. The chauffeur opened the door wider, and Mira caught a glimpse inside. Leather seats, polished wood, soft ambient lighting. It looked like a different world entirely. Arian gestured again, smiling just enough to make it seem safe, almost inviting. She took a deep breath. Okay, she whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it real. The moment she stepped closer, the rain falling on her hair, she felt it. A shift in the air, subtle but electric. Something had changed. This wasn't just a simple ride. Something big, unexpected, and perhaps life-altering was about to happen. And just as she opened the door, ready to step inside, a sudden flash of doubt hit her. What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? The door shut behind her with a quiet click, and the world outside, the drizzle, the chatter, the dull gray campus, vanished in an instant. The Rolls-Royce glided forward smoothly, its tires whispering over wet asphalt, while Mira sat frozen, heart hammering so loudly she was sure Arian could hear it. Inside, everything felt surreal. Soft leather seats, polished mahogany panels, a faint scent of fresh citrus lingering in the air. She had seen cars like this in movies, in magazines, in dreams, but never from the inside, never with someone she knew sitting calmly beside her, pretending this was the most ordinary thing in the world. Arian's calmness was unsettling. It made her wonder what he knew that she didn't. "You're quiet," he said, voice low, almost hesitant, breaking the tension. "I guess this is a lot." Mira nodded, unable to speak. She wanted to tell him everything. The endless days of surviving on scraps, the fear of falling behind, the loneliness that had crept into her life. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the rain streak down and blur the city lights, turning the streets into rivers of gold and red. Arian's hand brushed briefly against hers, a fleeting touch that made her stomach twist. "I've been watching you," he admitted, eyes not leaving the road. "Not in a weird way, just noticing. You're different. You care about things most people don't. And it mattered." Mira swallowed hard. She didn't know how to respond. Compliments felt strange, almost dangerous, coming from someone whose life was completely unlike hers. But there was sincerity in his voice, a truth she couldn't ignore. The car turned onto a wide avenue lined with trees, their leaves glittering with rain, and Mira felt an unshakable mix of excitement and dread. Every instinct screamed at her that she was stepping into something she might not be ready for. Her mind raced. What did Arian mean by watching? Why was he taking her somewhere now? And why did it feel like the world she knew, the careful, predictable world she had built, was slipping further away with every passing second? As the city lights blurred past, Mira realized she hadn't even asked where they were going. Every instinct she had screamed for answers, but Arian didn't offer them. Instead, he simply reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across to her. She hesitated, fingers trembling. The envelope was heavy in her hand, as if it carried more than just paper. Her mind raced with possibilities: scholarship, a job, a warning, a secret, or something completely unimaginable. The wet streets reflected in the car windows, and in those reflections, Mira saw a version of herself she had never met before. Daring, curious, standing on the edge of something enormous. And then, as she finally tore the envelope open, her eyes widened. Her heart skipped a beat. Whatever was inside, whatever revelation awaited her, it was going to change everything. But before she could fully process it, Arian spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made her stomach drop. "This is just the beginning." Mira's hands shook as she pulled the letter from the envelope. Her eyes skimmed the words, then froze. It wasn't a scholarship. It wasn't a job offer. It was an invitation, an exclusive event, a gathering of people she had only heard about in whispers, people who held influence, wealth, and power beyond imagination. Her name was listed at the top, highlighted in gold ink, as if she had been chosen for something extraordinary. Before she could speak, Arian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and paled, a flicker of tension breaking through his composed mask. "They're here," he whispered. "They know you're coming." The car slowed, and Mira's pulse spiked. Outside, she saw sleek black vehicles pull up, people stepping out in tailored suits and evening gowns, eyes sharp, evaluating. Not a smile in sight. "What? Who are they?" she stammered, clutching the envelope tighter. Arian's jaw tightened. "People who don't forget. People who notice every detail. And they don't like surprises." The realization hit Mira like ice water. This wasn't just a ride. This wasn't just an invitation. Somehow, her life, and every small, careful step she had taken, had landed her directly in the crosshairs of a world she wasn't ready for. And in that instant, she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. The Rolls-Royce came to a smooth stop, and Mira's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Outside, the crowd of impeccably dressed figures seemed to shimmer under the evening lights, their expressions unreadable. Arian opened the door and gestured for her to step out, but her legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed to run, yet curiosity held her rooted in place. "This way," Arian whispered, his voice steady but urgent. They moved through a grand, glittering hallway, chandeliers casting warm light over marble floors. Each step amplified Mira's anxiety. She felt exposed, small, and wildly out of place. She clutched the envelope like a lifeline, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the power, the wealth, the subtle tension among the guests. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Then they stopped. At the center of the room was a massive stage, and a single spotlight focused on an empty podium. Arian took her hand. "You've been chosen," he said softly. "Chosen because you see the world differently. Because you care when no one else does." Mira's throat went dry. She wanted to protest, to say she didn't belong, that she was just a poor student who shared her lunch. But before she could speak, the crowd hushed, turning their collective gaze toward her. She stepped forward, trembling, and suddenly realized this was her moment. The moment she had never imagined. One act of kindness had led her here, had changed the trajectory of her life. She opened the envelope again and saw a second note she hadn't noticed before. Trust no one but the one who brought you here. Her eyes darted to Arian. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd as a man stepped onto the stage behind her. He smiled, too smooth, too perfect. "Welcome," he said, voice calm but chilling. "You don't know it yet, but your life is about to be rewritten, and some debts must be paid." Mira's stomach turned. The invitation, the Royce, Arian's guidance. It wasn't just a reward. It was a test, a trap, and the people who now surrounded her held more power and more danger than she could have ever imagined. The room went silent, all eyes on her, and in that moment, she realized the world she had stepped into wasn't just glamorous, it was ruthless. And the next move she made could change everything or cost her everything. Mira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Her heart still raced, but for the first time that evening, clarity began to settle over her. She remembered the small acts that had brought her here, not wealth, not privilege, but simple human kindness. The sandwich she had shared, the smile she had offered, the little choices she had made in a world that often ignored her. They had shaped this moment, and she realized that even in the face of power and danger, her own values were her strongest shield. Arian squeezed her hand gently. "You're ready," he whispered. She looked at him, seeing not just a guide, but someone who had believed in her from the start, someone who had seen her beyond her struggles. For the first time, she allowed herself to trust him completely. Stepping onto the stage, Mira addressed the crowd with a voice she didn't even know she had. She spoke about kindness, resilience, and the hidden strength in ordinary people. The room listened, rapt. Faces softened, expressions shifted, and in that instant, she realized she wasn't just a visitor in this world. She could make a difference in it. The mysterious man who had appeared earlier nodded slowly, almost approvingly, before stepping back. The danger wasn't gone, but Mira had found her footing. She could navigate this new world without losing herself. And for the first time, she felt the exhilarating mix of fear and empowerment that comes when you realize life's twists can also be opportunities. Later, as the event ended, Arian led her back to the Royce. She looked out at the city lights, the rain now a soft memory on the streets below. "You'll never be invisible again," he said, smiling. "But you'll always be yourself. That's the part that matters." Mira smiled, a quiet, genuine smile, feeling the truth of his words. She had started the day with nothing but a small lunch and a heart full of hope. Now she had opportunity, guidance, and a glimpse of a life she had only dreamed of. But more importantly, she had learned that even the smallest gestures, sharing a meal, showing kindness, could ripple farther than she had ever imagined. As the Royce drove off into the night, Mira's thoughts drifted to her mother and brother, to the life she had left behind for just a moment, and she promised herself she would never forget where she came from. That promise, she realized, was her real power. And yet, even in the quiet of the drive, a subtle tension lingered, the sense that life's surprises weren't finished, that more twists could lie ahead. But this time, Mira knew she could face them. She had stepped out of the shadows and into a world of endless possibility, and she had done it on her own terms. For a poor student who had shared her food that afternoon, nothing would ever be ordinary again.